important. But as you start getting into the millions of records, a few that are off here and there, maybe not so much of a deal. But there's lots of different aspects to data quality. So we're going to talk about what quality is, where it shows up, why should we care, and how can we address issues. All right, so what's data quality? So because this is an AI focused conference, I decided to ask Google's LLM what data quality is. It's also now just at the top of all your Google results. So you get to use up all those bottles of water for server cooling that you want to or not. So it's funny because if you look, down the results, you'll see almost all this comes almost verbatim from like the top 3 results. But how well the data set meets expectations in regards to these different dimensions: accuracy, completeness, consistency, reliability, and they say other factors. We're going to talk about those other factors. So key for data management, ensures that your data is trustworthy, reliable, regardless of what your use cases are. Helps organizations identify errors, fits purpose. I thought it was really fun that they capitalized some words there in the second one. So that probably came from a bullet list on a web page someplace. But I want to focus on expectations, intended purpose, and this business growth item. So you might not think of someplace like ASU as a business, but we're going to talk about kind of the functional side of the organization and how that influences our data quality. All right, so there's a couple more dimensions than what they had mentioned. We're going to talk about these more in detail, so we're just going to skip that one basically. Examples. So I get to spend way more time than I'd like to fighting with data quality at the university. So I'm full of examples. And now you're going to get to see some of them too. All right, so we're going to talk about completeness, our first dimension of data quality. So if you've ever done pretty much any reporting in the HR space, you're probably familiar with the limitations of supervisor relationships in PeopleSoft. It's a headache for everybody. Workday, their org structure is basically entirely built around solving this problem, apparently. So that's going to be fun. But yeah, it's you can't really know who supervises someone in PeopleSoft. It's fun. If you're familiar with the U.S. Naval Community College program, we're looking at an issue where their application might not be collecting race and ethnicity like other applications do. And so now that data is different or missing. Kayla has been working on admissions data, including transcript stuff, and we'll receive transcripts, but they don't have dates, or we record the dates wrong for attendance at other schools. And that causes all kinds of fun issues. Working with test score data. I think I saw Lori at some point. We've been doing this for a long time. And there's a couple of different tables in PeopleSoft where they record test scores, and they're meant for different purposes. And sometimes the scores go into the wrong table. Lots of issues with test scores. You're going to see those come up a few more times. And then generally, when you're thinking about completeness, if you've ever taken like a class on data analytics, something like that, you're probably familiar with sparsity and issues that you might have regarding imputing values for missing data, things like that. So that's always an issue with our collection. Accuracy, so accuracy of data. A couple examples here. If you've used ePerson View, you've probably seen all kinds of email addresses, especially personal email addresses. Anyone want to take a guess at how many different ways you can spell Tempe and Phoenix? It's like hundreds. So we've got a lot of issues there, especially with self-reported data. And some of that data doesn't really matter. If someone gives us, the wrong city spelling for their home address or something, that's not really a functional element. But if we're looking at like self-reported ACT, SAT scores, that could potentially affect their admissions decisions. It could affect their financial aid. So some of these things have real implications. Timeliness. Think of this in a few different ways. So all these examples kind of address it in a slightly different perspective. So you've probably experienced warehouse tables that were just empty. or hadn't refreshed in 4 months and nobody knew about it. So we have issues like that pop up. Recently, someone was mentioning with the, what was it? The training data. So you go out to Canvas, you take your security, that kind of stuff. There's a dashboard out there and it's like, hey, just a heads up, this data is 48 hours old. It's like, why is it 48 hours old? Most of the warehouse is only 24 hours. So with the original Blackboard data, the first iteration of Canvas data, it was like an extra 24 hours in the processing funnel that we had to account for. So you'd have data from this system that got aggregated as like a grade in PeopleSoft or an ASR, no match. So you have timing issues. And then if you're dealing with student profile, you might notice that in the warehouse, you'll have the student profile table and it says they're enrolled, but then you go to the enrollment table and they're not enrolled. And there's just like few hours difference in how those tables get loaded. Orientation data gets like passed from one system to another and then uploaded to the warehouse. So it's an extra day old. All kinds of fun issues around timing that we deal with all the time, even if you don't know it. All right, consistency. Oh, it's great that the bullet points aren't a consistent size under consistency. So if you're familiar with our MDM platform, Master Data Management, it's used for kind of creating a single identity for anyone with an ASU affiliation. It takes users from all our different systems, customers, stakeholders, whatever, and says, okay, this person over here is the same as this person over here. So we have a consistent identity in that system. And it would be fantastic if that ended up in the warehouse at some point. In PeopleSoft, you might have people who have multiple identities. So they have 4 different employee IDs. That's never happened. 3 different employee IDs. And there are people out there who go out and identify that and kind of fix it as best as we can within the system to, again, make sure we have as consistent records as possible. Right now, pre-Workday HR, we still have Workday people or HR PeopleSoft, student PeopleSoft. There are tables that are in both of the systems that are supposed to align because you have the same people in both systems, and they just don't. So you might have race and ethnicity values are X for the student over here, and they're Y over in this system because the syncs don't always work correctly. And things like disappearing data. So I mentioned sparsity. Sometimes you might have a GPA from a transcript that just one day up and vanishes from the record. The record's still there, but that data point's not. So inconsistent. Data validity. So I mentioned test scores and test scores and test scores. You'll see SATs from the 1700s. It's probably not right. You might see an ACT score of 60. That's not possible. So we get all kinds of fun things like that in the test data. Working on fixing all that as much as possible, but we're going to talk about why that's not always. Tutoring data. We'll have students who went to a tutoring session, raised their hand to ask for help, and then left the tutoring session before they were done getting help or something. It's just dates, they're not recorded correctly, things aren't happening, they're trying to backfill. Fun there, and mobile app likes to test and prod, so lots of invalid data in the mobile app data. Uniqueness, so duplication. I'm going to start with complete dupes. So we have major map data, the major map table in Oracle, the old warehouse. You'd have entire rows which were exactly the same in every single column. That's an entirely duplicate record. Whereas we have other things where some of the fields might be slightly different between 2 rows. So recently there was a question in one of the Slack channels around, check to see if he's here. No. Okay. So the question was about duplicate residency values in student profile. And once we drilled down, it was actually because of how visa data is entered. Nothing to do with student profile or residency, but they end up getting related when you have these mixed grain data sets, aggregating data from all these different places. So it looks like you get duplication. So we have all these different issues that make our data quality maybe not ideal that we have to deal with on a daily basis. All right, so extra special shout out for this one. I don't see Kendall here either. This has been the bane of his existence for the last few months. So plan changes. This has been a thorn in my side for a while. We now have an actual form that students fill out to change plans at an enterprise level, so that's nice. But undergrad and grad were built separately. So if you're ever on the development side of the house, think through the downstream data implications you're developing these specs. So different teams, different systems, different interfaces led to different structures, different attributes. Nothing matches between these. Now, grad was built in PeopleSoft. Data looks pretty good. Undergrad was built with a web app form because PeopleSoft developers didn't have the time, is my interpretation of the situation. They're not collecting all the data that we get for grad. They're not necessarily storing all that information that they collect. So you would think if a student's changing from plan A to B, you'd probably want to know what both A and B were. We don't. Was it approved or not? Who knows? So lots of fun there. Different data sources. So you might have different, the web team likes to create their own data. And so that was used within the undergrad forms, and the PeopleSoft data was used with the grad forms. And again, the codes aren't necessarily the same. There's PeopleSoft data generally is kept fairly clean when it comes to codes and dimensions. Web, not so much. And different structures. So you get like PeopleSoft or plan description dash plan code. So they kind of combined it into a single field. So it makes it a little bit harder to use. And some of those forms are only stored in Salesforce, not PeopleSoft. So you don't even have all the data in one place. So all that's been great. Major maps. So I mentioned entire dupes in the old major maps tables. The source data for major maps is why that happens. The design of those tables is functional, but not super useful for analytics. So you get the same field stored in multiple tables. And if someone updates it, it only gets updated in one of those tables and not the other. So you don't know which one's true. If they delete a record, you have to look at 10 different tables to see if that record was deleted or not. Because if any of them show it's deleted, you have to remove it. So lots of fun there. So again, data design can affect data quality. All right, so why does this matter? Now, I imagine you've probably heard at least a few of those and thought that'd be annoying, right? But it's not just annoying, it's more than that. So I've got a few quotes here. Data scientists, woo, big fancy job title. They do cool things with data. These are the people you want to have in your department. What's going on? But if you can't measure it, you can't fix it. And 80% of the work is just getting decent data. So this is all DJ Patel, big shot in the data science world. 80%. All right, so how has our environment evolved and how has that affected our data quality requirements? So back in the day, what was data for? It was used in operational systems, right? We had a PeopleSoft interface, we had a Blackboard interface. That was all it was. It was just to support users in those interfaces. So if it didn't affect the processing, we didn't care about the quality. So we mentioned test scores for admissions. Well, same with those addresses. Like, do these things actually matter? Well, if you have a bad ACT or SAT score, it might not matter if you're being admitted on your high school GPA, right? It's an optional data point at that point. So who cares? We're not going to use the home address for a graduated student because they told us where to send their diploma. So we're probably using their diploma address. If a student submitted multiple applications, they haven't been admitted. Do we need to tie those together? Maybe not for processing. So then we started like inventing this thing called reporting. And so we start pulling the data out of the source systems into something like a warehouse. And so we still have limited concerns, right? So how are these reports being used in a processing environment? So what's being potentially customer facing, things like that. So if you have an invalid name for an admitted student or a bad email address, and you need to tell them to go to orientation on such and such date or sign up for orientation, and you can't contact them, that's actually a problem. If you're doing one of those finish line near graduation campaigns, you have to have decent data for what plan they were in, how many credit hours they had taken already, what their current GPA was. All those things now mattered a little bit more. Those might not be current students anymore, but we're trying to get them back. Then we entered the data-driven time period, and we've got analytics. And now we have dashboards and analyses and all this fun stuff. So now your data quality might become a little bit more relevant, depending on what you're doing with it, how accurate your results need to be, what kinds of decisions you're making based on it. So if we've got, let's say we've got age, we're looking for the average age of an ASU student, right? Thousands and thousands of students. If you have one student who's showing 0 years old and one student who's showing 120 years old, do those records really matter? Now, even if you were using mean instead of median, still wouldn't really matter. If a bunch of your records are null, you're building a predictive model, might be a little bit more meaningful. That's enough to potentially skew your results. If you've got 2 columns that are supposed to be related and you've got a bunch of values that clearly aren't, that could absolutely bias your coefficients. So when you're looking at this kind of trend reporting, historical analysis to build models, that old data for old students that we don't actually process anymore can affect how we process current students, because it affects the decisions we made, the models we built. But generally, the older data is, the less likely it's going to be used in one of those use cases. We also tend to now copy data across systems more. So it's used in multiple places, gets out of sync, things like that. It's harder to identify like a single source of truth, and data is not always pulling from what you would consider to be the single source of truth. Prescriptive modeling is kind of like predictive modeling, but with an intent, right? So this is something that's absolutely going to be affecting someone. So it's a little bit more important. All right, so where are we going? You've probably heard lots of talk of LLMs the last couple of days. How does this affect them? Well, significantly, but also kind of not. It really depends on what you're building. So as people build more and more of these items, it's kind of like dashboards, right? Anyone can go out, grab some data, build something. How important is it going to be? Depends on who's using it, what they're using it for. So LLMs could absolutely have any data point as a relevant issue, but you don't know until it happens. And so because of that, you're looking at all your data quality is potentially a little more elevated. Even if your source data, as it flows into the LLM, the way the LLM functions, right? Neural nets, all that fun stuff, that data point itself isn't likely to be referenced, but its impact on everything is almost always present. So everything can be influential somewhat, even though it's all combined and aggregated. Well, that's not what I wanted. Models hallucinate. So even if your data is great, it doesn't mean the model's not going to make up something anyway. So going in the other direction, and models can be inputs for other models. So all this stuff potentially flows downstream. Regardless, you generally want to have better inputs to have better outputs, right? Junk in, junk out. And LLMs are usually customer facing, at least to this point. And so any mistakes resulting from data quality are going to be more impactful because of that, especially if you're building a chatbot and it's pulling their current balance or something like that. You want to make sure it's accurate. So the way we deal with some of this stuff in the data enrichment world, I always have to tie back to this because this is my life. So we have projects and we're building for everybody doing everything, essentially. So we have to consider all the uses. And because of that, we tend to focus a little bit more on cleaning as part of our process. If we find an issue, we kind of go through this order of priorities. So correct it at the source, if that can be done, right? We don't have that ability, but we generally know who does. If that's not an option, we create some sort of a transformation within our logic to address it as best as possible, make it as usable as possible. And if there is no logical solution based on the SME's understanding, we'll identify patterns and maybe take a guess. Maybe, maybe not. Sometimes we'll just leave it as is and we'll tell you about the problem. And so you're, as a user, aware of it as an issue. And then obviously if someone brings something up that we haven't identified, we'll go back through and start from the beginning and try to figure out how best to address it. All right, so diminishing returns, potentially. Again, one really old data point that's off out of a bunch. Is it a problem? Well, if it's the only, if it's in a significant field that's maybe used as a common dashboard filter, and it's the only instance of that value, it's now an additional value in a dropdown that someone has to filter a dashboard, right? That's annoying, at least. So it really depends on the use case, what the field is. All right, so our junk train, start with data to get to decisions. I have no idea what time it is. Are you checking me? What time are we done? 30? Okay, we're doing good. All right, so how do we measure data quality and its effects? We want to make sure that anyone using the data understands the quality of the data and what that means downstream for what they're doing, what they're looking at. If we identify those problems, we make sure everyone understands that. I clearly need to use something other than the arrow keys, or let's switch hands. Brilliant. So how do we do that? We share that information, make sure people are aware, we document it. That's generally how we're sharing that information. And so we kind of wonder as we're going through and doing this, I know most of my time is probably dealing with bad data, but how much is everyone else spending? Hopefully less. Everyone's their time with these issues, then we need to refocus our efforts. Looking kind of at that string from data to decisions, right? We're magnifying the impact of all of these. The further it gets. As we move into the automation age, there's fewer eyes on the data, right? There's fewer places being validated, so we're more likely to end up with problems that people aren't aware of. And with AI, all that just grows more and more and more. People can use bad data without knowing it. So minor problem, if you're creating I'm just gonna say BAN for a marketing dashboard and it's off by a few records, it's not really gonna impact anything. If you're doing some sort of a statistical analysis and you're missing a record or something like that, it could potentially impact the outcome. How much that impacts depends on how it's being used. But if it's being used to make a decision, someone could make a bad decision, and that would be problematic. That's all potentially from bad data. So because of that, making small fixes as far upstream as possible, right, as close to the source as possible, can have major effects downstream, saving people time, leading to better decisions. So do it at the application if possible. If not, as soon as you can. You don't want to have everyone trying to recreate these fixes at like the dashboard modeling layer. So fix soon, solve later. It affects the timing, life cycle effects, all that fun stuff. Okay. Are you going to tell them what we can do about it? Yeah. Oh, we're going to do a Slido. Yeah. All right. I'll initiate Slido. You take the mic.
Okay. Hey everyone, I'm Olli Honkkila. I'm a data governance manager at ET. And are we doing the Slido now? Perfect. So I have a dilemma. On one hand, I'm living my dream co-presenting with Josh for the first time ever. And the other hand, I'm between you and lunch. But let's do this. Let's do this first. Are we gonna see the results at some point? Oh. Oh, okay. Okay. Are you getting in?
Creating kind of your impression of data quality here. It could be related to your past experiences elsewhere. It could just be your current frustration level. That's all I got.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So what we're with Josh and I, there are things that you could do by yourself, but there are also things that affect other people. And we're really like, how do we get to the point that we get the information flowing from the people downstream working on the reporting and things like that to the people who are responsible for the source systems and things like that. So one thing for me is like, we need to ask people, let them, tell us what they're doing right now. Like that's the first thing that we wanted to know. Do we have somewhere with this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 mean?
I said 1 is poor and 5 is excellent.
Okay.
So we've got no poor. We've got a few excellent.
Is that what you expected?
I mean, we've got a pretty normal distribution here. It's slightly skewed. I said pretty normal. It's objective. It's probably already run the numbers. He's gonna tell me how far off of normal it is.
So we're happy with this?
Yeah, I mean, half the people think it's moderate. And I'm gonna assume it's probably a little skewed based on the giant laundry list of examples I gave earlier. Yeah, so like it's probably a little better.
Kind of dumping people's moods down sufficiently. Okay.
Some bias in that room at the moment.
Do we want to do the next one?
Yeah, let's move to the next one. So, are you now seeing the next question? I've never done multiple Slido questions, so are you seeing this? Yeah, it's working. So, how many hours a week are you spending? Or if you had the time to spend, how many hours do you think you'd spend just cleaning and preparing your data?
Are you Twyla? Twyla. Okay, we can do it later with you. During lunch break, everybody else, Twyla stays here.
So Oli was asking me what I expected to see on this slide, and I think it's about this. So it's a biased directional effect. It's not normal.
What do you think about more than 20 hours, 10%?
I can relate.
Okay, shall we go next one?
Let's go to the next one. So once you've found those problems, how are you generally addressing them? I'd say what's your primary go-to, right? You're supposed to rank these from 1 to 5. So 1 would be your most likely approach. Oh, that's not good to see.
Pull the block. We don't want to record this.
That's an interesting one. Fix it yourself. I've never had that option, so I didn't even think of it. So I can see the bottom one, huh? I guess we don't get to see them all at once. Okay, so lots of Slack go-tos. Some of the, where's that data? PeopleSoft group. Lots of people make and do. I should have a follow-up on that one.
Next year.
Yeah.
Oh, we should have also like have a presentation and data conference. That's an option.
That's at least one person's responding that way.
Okay, I think we,
All right.
yeah.
That's good.
And well, thank you everybody for we're not done yet. I'm not thanking you for they don't leave.
Yeah, always self-taught.
Yeah. So we had Slack there as number one. So my job here is to bring a little like glimmer of hope after Josh was, putting, everything out there. But two things that I'd like to talk about here, and you can see there's also some Finnish there. I don't know how many here in the room speaks Finnish. We can other. Okay, so one thing that I wanted to bring is these methods that we have. We have a Slack, which I love, but we're working on a couple of new things, which is open metadata, which here I say here is a new wonderful opportunity for us to really start documenting and bring information from upstreams and downstreams both ways. So I don't know how many here have never heard of open metadata, but if you haven't, it's going to be our data dictionary and lineage tool. We're currently implementing it. And one thing that we can do there really well is to have conversations about data elements and have them documented in the places that both the owners of the data and the users of the data will be able to see that. And we can also result in actions. I'm not saying that it's going to replace where is that data, because I feel there's use for both of these, but I think it's going to augment it nicely. So it has conversations there where you can tag people that you think should be doing things, and you can also then assign some tasks if you need to add, for example, descriptions. But also it can work as the data owners that they can use announcements. So you can go all the downstreams, whoever is using the data will know if there are any changes in there. So these are the things that will be helpful in the future when we finally get this product and start using it. The other thing that I wanted to talk to you about, is that we have a newly formed group. Sorry, one more. Okay, perfect. Sorry. So what we have is the data governance model at ASU. We have trustees with the very highest level of executives under President Crow. And then we have data stewards that we have identified for 42 different subject domains. We have created data domains. You can see here, business, finance, healthcare, service delivery. And then under the data domains, we have created data subject domains. I'm just using as an example here, student and an academic structure. You can see the level of granularity. So my hope is that in the future, we will find new ways to connect with the people upstream so that we can there, as often as possible, fix the problems that Josh was talking to, that not everything has to be done by him in the future. We'll get there, hopefully. But that's the glimmer of hope, the open metadata and this data steward structure, I hope will help us. Anything else, Josh? Do you want to have parting last words?
No, we're keeping people from their food. So 1 second for questions. Going, food time.
Okay, perfect.